Welcome to the Athlete's Compass podcast. Join us each week as sports scientist and founder of Athletica AI, Dr. Paul Laursen, athlete, coach, and sports scientist Marjaana Rakai, coach and cyclist Paul Warloski, and everyday athletes discuss training, racing, and improving health and fitness. Get ready for your journey to peak performance. Hello and welcome to a new Athlete's Compass podcast where we navigate training, fitness, and health for everyday athletes. In the Northern Hemisphere, we're getting closer to summer and summer heat. That means acclimatizing our bodies to get used to the heat so we can still do our workouts and races despite. So we're talking about how do we acclimatize to heat? What exactly is that and how does it benefit endurance athletes? Paul, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So heat acclimation or acclimatization is basically the process of getting hot. And it basically, that whole process, after you adapt, it helps so that you don't feel as you're getting as hot the next time. And there's all these physiological processes that it helps. And we probably, I can see that's the second question. We probably need to go right there, right off the bat, Paul, is like what actually happens when you get exposure to heat and how do you heat acclimatize. So basically when you get hot, your heart rate increases, like your core temperature increases. And then the body thinks, well, we got to do something about that. And it has two main means of working towards protecting its homeostasis. And the first one is that we all know is that we start to sweat more, and that's the process of creating sweat to our skin causes for the process of evaporation. So when we evaporate sweat from the skin, that cools the body. And that's really important to recognize. Like sweating itself doesn't cool you, but it's the process of evaporating that sweat is what cools you. And you know that when you go to some place like Hawaii or some humid environment. And when you're in that humid environment, humidity means lots of water is in the air, and you're not able to evaporate that sweat from the skin, so therefore you can't cool your body as much. And that's why in humid environments you feel really hot. So that's the first process. The other one though is an increase in skin blood flow. So both of these require more cardiac output, so more volume of blood to the periphery of your body, the outside of your body. And that's got to be, and we see this when you start out, your heart rate is through the roof, right? In the heat, you'll see a really high heart rate. And that's because your cardiovascular system is struggling to deliver all of that water componentry to the outside, the periphery of the body in the, with the aim of getting rid of heat. Because, one thing we should also mention, Paul, is that if we get too hot, like we can die. Like it's a really dangerous sort of thing if you get too hot. And the big one is that it's if you've cooked a fried egg recently, you've cooked an egg on a fry pan, you'll see what happens to the proteins in that egg when it heats up, right? And that's called the process of denaturing. So they totally get reconfigured and changed. So the same in effect would actually happen to you. We have this really, all of us, we have this really narrow temperature range that our bodies can only go outside. And actually, we can go a lot cooler than we can hotter. So it's something like, it's only like 41, 42 degrees, and your proteins in your body are going to start to denaturing, and they come apart, and they'll be non-functioning. So it's really can be, quite damaging and indeed fatal, right? You can die of this. So this is a really important process that we evolved. And in fact, that whole evolutionary step was so critical in our ability to thrive as humans. And it's something, the ability to evaporate sweat from the body was something that only 2 or 3 or 4 other animals, I think it was the camel, the horse, and I've blanked on the fourth one that can actually sweat to rid heat. And they believe that this is, from an evolutionary standpoint, this enabled us to chase down prey in the desert when others were kind of scurrying for protective cover in the shade, and it enabled us to devour them and to take that fat that was required and to make our brains and to develop more connections and cognitive abilities. And so I'm all over the place here, Paul, but but
Wow.
basically the main thing is that this vital adaptation of heat acclimation is is super important, something we evolved relative to very few other animals. And the main thing we see is with repeated exposures of heat, we see a lower core temperature, an increased ability to sweat, an increased ability to deliver blood to the skin, and a lowered heart rate, in terms of the main ones that we see. And of course, an improved performance. So we also get a greater performance from this whole thing. So I'll stop there. And Mariana, did I miss anything?
That was a lot, but and I especially enjoyed the evolutionary tale
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So I'm from Arctic Circle. The last 15 years, I've tried to make myself love heat, but I still don't. Like I've lived in Rio de Janeiro, Dubai, like one of the most humid and hot environments in the world. And I just freaking hate it. Like I would rather be skiing on the North Pole 365 days a year than, run, bike, swim somewhere in the heat. And I wonder if there's genetic differences. Like, is there something, asking for a friend from Arctic Circle here, is there something in our genetic, makeup that makes some people better heat adapted than others? And I have a good comparison though, because my Swedish friend Mia, hi Mia, we both lived in Dubai. We would work out together. We would run and bike. And one race particularly comes to mind. We met up for a warm up. I'm already sweating, like buckets, like pearls of sweat. And I look at her and she's got nothing on her skin. She's all dry and I'm sweating. So obviously my heat tolerance, or my processes are working. I'm sweating. I'm trying to keep myself cool, right? And she's standing there and like looking at me puzzled, like, why are you sweating? And every time we went for runs or bikes, like I would be sweating buckets and she was just like barely breaking a sweat. Like, and she's from Sweden. So our genetic base must be pretty close to similar. And even like based on our Garmin watches, our VO2s are quite similar. She kicks my ass on the run, but I kick her on the bike and swim. So we're pretty much at the same fitness level as well. So my question is there anything in genetic factors that could affect heat tolerance?
Yeah, for sure. So I left that one out of the adaptation process, and it's something, so because I knew this was coming, right? But it's, yeah, the other physiological adaptation that gets talked about less, but it's pertinent, relevant to what you're talking about, is the adaptation of the heat shock protein. And the heat shock protein sits within all of our cells, and that is, of course, driven by your DNA. So yes, Mariana, it is something that does have a genetic component, and some of it. And what you ask, well, what's this heat shock protein thing all about? Well, heat shock protein is ultimately this regulator protein that sits to create tight junctions, ultimately tightness of your protein. So remember, we led off and we envisioned the egg that was frying, right? And then the proteins that were denaturing. Well, you could imagine, I guess, ultimately that you had, the Mia egg and the Mariana egg, and the Mia egg The Mia egg, when you crack it, it's slow to denature and stuff on the fry pan. The Marjaana egg, when you crack that one down, it's like it's just like already at your fried egg kind of level, right? So it denatures super fast because the Mia egg, it has like those that genetic componentry is like, you know, with the tight junctions and stuff, better heat shock proteins, better to withstand the heat resistance. And so, yeah, but the good news is, Marjaana, is that you can work towards the Mia egg by getting more and more exposures, right? So, yeah, there is this plasticity of response. You know, you can keep telling your proteins that you want them to develop the resistance to the heat. And that's what you get with those repeated exposures. But it takes a lot longer than the classic adaptations of reduced heart rate, of, you know, increased sweat rate, increased skin blood flow, increased performance. So there's like kind of like a fast response and a slow response. And the heat shock protein one is like the chronic slow response with a genetic component too. There's some that are like Mia who are just better than others. So I'm fortunate. I'm in the Mia camp, and this is really why I went down under to do my PhD. Like, I wanted out of the Vancouver rain, you know, and the cold Canadian climate. I was just so excited when I got my PhD scholarship down there because, you know, I just picked up the endless summer lifestyle with surfing and I love the heat. And I'm Scandinavian like yourself, right, with Danish blood. So it's interesting. There's that individual response, always an individual response with anything to do with training or stressors.
So I fry real quick.
You love the fried egg? I like that one.
I like that. But I don't understand. Like, I've tried to fry myself 15 years, and I don't like. I feel like I can passively tolerate heat a lot more, but when I start moving, it's still a struggle. So,
But don't forget though, like, you know, even though we sometimes live in these hot climates like Rio or Dubai, it pushes a lot of us to go indoors in the air conditioning, right? And unfortunately, if you're going to do that, it sort of slows it all down. You're not sleeping in the heat, and really to get these kind of chronic exposures, you pretty much, like, I know a lot of I remember a story from Simon Whitfield with who's basically he won Sydney gold in the triathlon, and then he got silver in Beijing. And I remember, I think when the Canadian team booked accommodation for Simon, in Beijing, they went without air conditioning because they wanted to kind of keep those adaptations going, and because they knew about that kind of chronic long exposure time to it, where the air conditioning can actually blunt what you're trying to get. This is at the elite level, of course, right? But it's a good story to remind us of the importance of that, the length of the stress exposure. So yeah, it's a balance. It's a real balance. But that's an important piece of the puzzle to kind of think about when you're working towards your own event.
for sure. My next event is this week, Saturday, and
Yes.
weather report is a little scary for me. Plus 31 degrees as I come off the bike and during the first hour of my run. So I have been doing my workouts in the heat. Is there, like, for others who are coming from cold climate, is it too late to start heat acclimatizing right now?
Nope, never too late. Just, yeah, really, like, even like training too, right? Like, it's never too late to get a little bit more training. You don't want to cook yourself, but yeah, there's it's never too late. So yeah, you want to give that stimulus, but what we have to realize with the heat stimulus is that it is a stress. It's a heat stress. So you're going to give your body stress when you give it heat, and that's part of the juggle of you know, and that kind of goes into the whole cluster of training stress, along with all the other different stressors. That's why, you know, you really have to be careful if you're ever doing anything high intensity in the heat. That can really be way too much stress. And that's probably the majority, the best, typically best practice is to do your aerobic sessions in the heat, not do HIIT sessions in the heat. Save your HIIT sessions for the trainer and the cooler kind of climate to get the specific stimulus peripherally in the legs while you can kind of control the central stuff. Because if you're going to go outside and do HIIT work in really hot conditions, you're giving yourself a double whammy. So you really have to be mindful of the added stress that you get with heat and work towards kind of balancing that.
So you would stop, like if somebody is trying to do heat adaptation this week with the race Saturday, you would probably stop day before, 2 days before, for not.
Yeah, I wouldn't do, it would be like the taper, right? Like you want to gain freshness in that taper period. So, 1 or 2 days before you just, I wouldn't stay indoors all day, but it's like, you wouldn't want to go, be outdoors the whole day. Like, you just give yourself a small heat window sort of stress. And again, the more acclimated that you are, the less that is a stressor to you. So yeah, it's just like training too, right? If you're at really high training loads, which I think we're going to talk about next week, is then you can probably handle a larger acute dose. So it's the same thing with the heat. If you're well heat acclimated, you can really handle these times outdoors. It's just like it kind of doesn't phase you too much. You're like a Mia, and your egg doesn't get fried.
I love that.
Just for clarification for our listeners, it's not just any old race that Marjaana is doing this weekend. It's Ironman Texas. I mean, she's doing an Ironman, which is no joke, and so it's a lot of intensity in the heat. It's not just spending a couple minutes out there. So how long, if Marjaana had all the time in the world, how long would it take for someone to get heat acclimatized, and what factors influence this process?
Yeah. Oh, so we already spoke about the genetic factor. Well, that one's always there, but who knows what everyone's at. And then also the recency of your exposure is going to be also an influencer there. But if we look to the academic research papers, they typically show a period of anywhere from 5 to 14 days. Individually, you get a kick in your in all these various different responses. One of the big ones, actually, the other important adaptations that I forgot to mention was the plasma volume response. So plasma volume is the water componentry of your cardiovascular system. And this is actually kidney driven. So your kidneys start retaining more salt. Water follows salt into the blood compartment, and your plasma volume expands. So when your plasma volume expands, that increases your stroke volume, the volume of blood pumped each beat by the heart, and of course lowers the heart rate. So that's all kicked off by we might have asked ourselves, well, why is heart rate lower? It's because, well, the kidney kind of kicked everything off. So that's really important to realize. ADH and aldosterone are the hormones that are involved that are creating that adaptation. But this response, you are going to get something certainly after probably 3 to 5 days in terms of that start process of the plasma volume expansion and the lowered heart rate. And then everything kind of just keeps going as you continue to give this stimulus, this heat stimulus, over anywhere from 5 to 14 days and onwards. Now, this is a real passion topic for me, being in the high performance space that was, with so many Olympic Games in hot environments. This is something we really needed to research. I had a PhD student, Julia Casadio, who came in and did did her whole PhD on ways that you could go about from a high performance setting to heat acclimate. And she came up with these really cool models where you can actually periodize the heat stimulus. In other words, you could come in just like a training plan where you do, you periodize an endurance phase, and just like the Athletica plans, you periodize a high intensity phase. Same sort of thing. You can come in and just do like 3 or 4 days of heat, and then pull that out, and then you could do some other things, and then do another couple days of heat. So as long as you're continuing to give that heat stimulus, Julia showed in her research that you can maintain a good level of heat acclimation, but still getting the other componentries of your training plan that you don't want to lose, right? For example, Marjaana's been training for Ironman. We've just been talking about that. She doesn't want to miss out on her long ride, irrespective of whether it's a hot or cold day. That's mint and super important for her success and performance in Ironman Texas. She needs that. So you wouldn't, even though maybe she's concerned about heat, you wouldn't do you wouldn't just do a heat session on that day in light of the long session. So it's kind of cool, because that means that we can use other methods like sauna or hot water immersion, like a spa, or other means of getting that heat stimulus. So I'm all over the place again, Paul, as per usual. But basically, I'm kind of saying, I think the question was how long, 5 to 14 days, and plasma volume expansion is a key adaptation physiological mechanism that we need to consider.
So say somebody's aiming for hotter than their normal climate race, and they have 2 weeks to prepare themselves. So they could use sauna, or make themselves something hot at home, like use a space heater, whatnot, in a small room while they're biking. Do those like 3 days, and then do long bike rides, the key sessions on a separate days that are not heat adaptation days.
Absolutely, exactly. So as we always say, lots of ways to skin the cat, right, with our training and our training plans. But that's a great method. So you've got this repeated exposure. You've done 3 days of where you're in the heat of at least some duration, and we've all have this context that we live around, whether if we're, say, in a cold environment, or we're looking at the travel plan, and we can see that we're going to be landing in Hawaii for 6 days in front. So we know we're going to probably have the opportunity to get 6 days of heat acclimation, when we land at the race, say, for example. But maybe prior to that, coming from the cold climate, I've got a sauna available, I've got a hot tub available, and I'll do different means of actually being able to get into that hot environment. The principle is, and this is really important, key point here, Paul, is that you have to get hot. That, like, very simply, you got to get kind of uncomfortably hot a little bit, just beyond uncomfortable in the heat for a given duration of time. How long is that duration? Well, how long is a piece of string, right? Like, it's individual to your own tolerance. So, like Marjaana versus me, all right? Marjaana is probably not going to be quite as tolerant as that time under heat as Mia is going to be, right? But it's something that we definitely lengthen out. And I think of a classic Athletica example, and I believe Cindy wrote about this in her blog, but when Cindy did Kona and killed it there, she was coming from late September, early October, late fall, cool temperatures here in Revelstoke. And we had to get into the sauna for that. And she was hating it. Kind of like you. She was like, oh, she definitely had a Marjaana response. She was not enjoying her time in there. And she was starting like 15 minutes kind of toleration time. But she progressed that out to, 30, 35, 40 minutes by the end. And she was, so again, you want to just lengthen that exposure time within your own tolerance level. Don't be crazy, but this is time being hot and uncomfortable is the stimulus that's going to adapt everything from the plasma volume response to the heart rate to the heat shock proteins eventually as well.
So, time for a fun fact. There are 3.5 million saunas in Finland and a population of 5.5 million. I grew up in sauna basically. So you would think that because I've like while I'm growing up, we had sauna almost every day we went to sauna. But I also enjoyed, the tradition of jumping into a cold lake or making nude snow angels in between. Like you would go in sauna and then go out, cool off. That was my favorite part. It still is when I go to Finland, like just cool off as soon as possible. I can't stay there for too long, but I do enjoy sauna. I guess that's the only heat I enjoy.
Yeah, well, I think that's what you should work towards. Maybe in the future, Mariana. I love my sauna as well. That's been my greatest investment here in Revelstoke is that. And but yeah, it's a great one to work on your own sort of tolerance. And there's so many benefits, right? And from getting hot and getting too hot and getting too cold. But I believe you want both. Stress factors to be periodizing in your human your human physiology for your health.
So my Garmin gives me a percentage of heat acclimatization, based on I'm not sure what it's based on, but how long I've been riding outside, I assume. Is that an accurate number? Sort of.
You got me, Paul.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't know what Garmin and the First Beat team are doing over there in that one, and it might be something that's good. I honestly haven't explored it, and but yeah, that'll be something that us in Athletica, we do our own thing, and that's we'll be working on that one a little bit in the future for sure with the tools that we can leverage out there. But I don't know what Garmin does for their heat acclimation.
So we have 5 to 14 days that it takes to get heat acclimatized. We need to increase this is kind of my three things in the middle here, but we need to increase the bouts, but is it enough to simply go ride or run in the heat doing our aerobic? Do we need to be in the sauna? Do we need to have other protocols that accelerate this process?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Paul, and one that I probably didn't make very clear. But it's like if you had to pick a exercise mode like passive versus active, that's going to be, is one going to be more beneficial than the other one? It's certainly the active one. So active heat acclimation is more powerful than just passively sitting in the sauna or any other hot environments. So if you have an option, then definitely go for the moving one. And then you want to, again, I think it's anywhere from, if you're moving, anywhere from 30 minutes to 90 minutes is great. Of course, if you can go longer, like if I'm thinking when you arrive in Kona, if you've arrived 10 days before, well, it's great if you can preview the course on a nice long slow ride, even like a modified version. So, and if you're going to do that, and I've done this many times, you're getting likely 5 to 7 or 8 hours out there, kind of thing, just riding really slowly in those hot temperatures. So again, there's a bit of an art and science kind of thing here. We've been talking a lot about the science, but at the end of the day, it's it's the art that you can apply that science in the field when you get to your place, like Mariana's about to do here in Texas. So go Mariana.
Are there any risks that we need to be aware of in terms of getting used to the heat?
Yeah, for sure. And we did briefly touch on it, Paul, and it's just the fact that we have to recognize heat is a stress.
Yeah.
And it's just and doing like HIIT training. There's there's a study, Chris Taylor, I think, did it in the UK, and he looked at doing HIIT in heat, and it's just a disaster. Ultimately, it's like, because it's just high intensity exercise. Remember that when you're exercising, you're producing heat, and so imagine if you're producing heat, you're not able to rid it, and you're actually gaining more heat. Like, your core temperature just soars in high intensity work. So caution around high intensity work. And then caution with the progression of that as well. Like, don't go big on day one, right? Day one of heat acclimation, and it's like, oh, I'm going to have a monster heat session, right? Like, you really got to be in tune with your feel, monitor your heart rate, make sure that, water and cold water is your friend on these sorts of sessions. So have that available. There is, and again, as you become more accustomed to it, there is a way to augment the response, but it should only be used in a well-conditioned athletes. And that is, you can actually refrain from drinking and you'll get a larger plasma volume response. That's been established too. But this is only in the very experienced and already well heat acclimated individuals. Like, if you're already up towards 7 to 10 days kind of thing, you could abstain from drinking a little bit and then have a little bit more later. And then, in the post-exercise period, that's when you need to replenish with both water and salts. Salts come in, all meat, right? Remember, all meat is like skeletal muscle, so it's going to be laden with all the salts that you want. So consider that as a post-meal. Bacon is a classic one. Healthy, free range only if you can. But it's like, salt and water. How are you going to get that back in you in the post-exercise period so that you can rehydrate, and that plasma volume is going to be repleted for the next time? That's the goal of the session. So give yourself the stimulus, but also give yourself all the tools to put back to make you more bulletproof for the next one.
Is there differences in like a fitness level, like VO2 max or gender? How well?
Yeah. Let's just start with fitness level. And this is, again, so glad you brought that up, because that is another big co-founder. Fitness level itself is a way of heat acclimating. If your VO2 max is already high, if you're exercise training and trained, you already are partially heat acclimated. That's been shown in all the different studies. So keep that in mind. Like, fitness always rules. That's the number one sort of factor. Gender, again, I always kind of think of the individual. I can, potentially, I'm trying to think. There may be some gender differences in terms of tolerance. Like, females are typically, rock stars and very tolerant to stress, but it's always the individual, right? So I'm only just reflecting on my the individuals and whatnot that I train. And, I've had lots of Mias and stuff that just, handle that heat quite well. But then there's Marjaana's as well. So I really think it comes down more to an individual level. I'm thinking about water components, and men generally have more fat-free mass. Fat-free mass is going to have a larger water component to it than fat mass. But again, these are really kind of come down to the individual, as opposed to just blanketly saying, females X, males Y. I think it just comes down to the individual. But fitness, no question. Fitter you are, the more heat acclimated you already are. But we still see an effect of this, right? So Alistair Brownlee, athletic ambassador, classic example, and he'll admit it as himself. You saw him in the T100 in Miami, and he was coming from the UK. He was leading that race, but the heat got to him in the end, right? Coming from that cold climate. And then, and we also look at the pros in those T100s. In the Singapore race, this was a cooking hot race with that high humidity. And you could see everyone just pouring everything on top of them in terms of the ice buckets and stuff. It was fantastic to watch.
That's what I'm going to do.
Yes, you
ice,
will.
ice
Yes, you.
everywhere. And
Yeah.
I was going to, because the lake temperature is probably going to be pretty hot. I'm going to do a swimsuit instead of tri suit or wetsuit. I'm just going to go with the swimsuit and do full change in the first, because I don't want
Mm.
to heat up during the first hour. So
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, and that is an interesting one too, right? So in warm temperatures, you don't get that evaporative sweat loss that we led off the podcast with. So the only way you can rid heat is through conduction and convection, right? Of that water, the transfer of heat from your body to the water, but you don't get any sweat evaporation. The sweat evaporation is what cools. So that's why you won't get cool until you build up all this heat in the swim sometimes in hot swims. Have you ever had those before? And then you need to get rid of it when the cool air is passing through you on the bike, and then you're able to sweat. And hopefully it's not. I don't know how humid it's going to be for the race, Marianne. Have you looked at that?
could be pretty humid, like 60 to 80%.
Oh yeah, that'll be
Typical.
a good test.
Yeah, typical
Nice,
Texas. But a lot of athletes,
awesome.
they want to they want to wear wetsuits because the buoyancy effect, and they feel like they're faster on the swim. But I always think, like, if it's close to non-wetsuit legal, you should really be thinking, is it smart to cook underneath that wetsuit, even if you're 5 minutes faster using the wetsuit than if you just swim with your dry suit or your swimsuit? Because at least if you're wearing a swimsuit, you're not cooking. You don't get the pre-cooling effect, which I would like to. Like if it was nice and cool, 18 degrees Celsius for the rest of the day, but at least I won't be cooking.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind, Mariana, as you go into when you're preparing for the race, make sure that the drink that you're consuming is cold, ice cold, in that before you get in. So, and if you're feeling a little cold, a little chilly before you get in that water, don't worry about it too much. You don't want to be ice cold. You don't want to have cold muscles that are preventing you from going, but it's like just a little cool and stuff. You want a cool core and warm muscles is the ideal sort of recipe for success, because that core is going to get a lot warmer later on during the day. Ice slushy is another great one you can use. Yeah.
That actually brings me to my other question. Are there nutritional strategies? Ice cold food, but I mean, any supplements, anything that we can take before or during to help this process, or do we just need to keep cool?
The only thing that's really important to note, Paul, in the heat, what the science says is that you'll burn more carbs in hot conditions. So there's this I don't know what happens. It's like I don't know if it's basically the data shows that you burn more sugar when the muscle is hot. And why is that occurring? Well, not really sure, but glycolysis for whatever reason spins faster
Mm.
in hot conditions. And then, so if that's the case, it probably gives a bit of a tip of the hat for consumptions of carbohydrates during exercise. But that's going to be limited. You're going to be consuming probably carbohydrates to the level of your tolerance during anyways. So, how much that's going to be, we've spoken about this before, it can be anything from 50 to 120 grams an hour. But yeah, I guess just knowledge that, glycolysis is, sugar burning is happening a lot faster in the heat. Well, then that's good to know. It probably is important that I consume carbohydrates during my race in the heat. Yeah, and of course, ice cold fluids all the way, and and anywhere you can put ice down your chest, under your armpits, in your hands, or other great places, over your head, in your cap, whatever you can do, any place you can put ice, to get that added cooling effect, to keep the core temperature cool, is a bonus. Again, remember the number one factor is your brain is going to lower its exercise performance because it doesn't want you to turn into the fried egg, right? It doesn't want to denature that protein. It's going to do everything it can to protect you. So you're kind of in this whole battle throughout your race between your desire to go forward and your body's desire to protect itself. This will be the tightrope that Marjaana walks as she goes through her Ironman Texas. And every other athlete that's out there that's listening to this, they're going through that same battle in their mind. And that's, it's the fun part of endurance sport. And this really comes down to the mind, being aware of that, right? Because the mental component is just so critical, right? Like you've got that, Marjaana's, you're getting ready to do this, right? Like you got to almost rehearse in your mind going forward. There will be periods of heat in there. So mentally, get used to that, condition the mind to accept that will be part, and pace accordingly too, right? If you're going out of the gates, remember every time when you're exercising, you're adding heat to the system. So, because that's what happens when there's the metabolic byproduct is when we burn calories, fat and carbohydrates, it's an inefficient process. And 75% or thereabouts of the energy that's burnt goes as wasted heat, and that creates our warm bloods. That's why we're sitting here as warm-blooded animals right now in this podcast, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, when we're going in the exercise context, that's going to really push our core temperature skyward, and when we increase the intensity, it's going to move it even faster. So you've got to really pace and keep exercise intensity at bay, and your mind knows what it needs to do to control all these sorts of factors. So trust it, and and good luck.
Yeah, and the next podcast we do, not the next, but maybe in 2 podcasts, we'll see how the schedule turns out. But we're going to do some race reports of Marjaana's Texas Ironman and some of my gravel races, and we're going to get some response from Paul about how we did, and some feedback, and see if we can learn some things about our training program. So listen for that podcast. So here are 3 things that I learned about heat adaptation, heat acclimatization. One is that it's not the sweat that's cooling your body so much, it's the evaporation that is cooling your body. And so therefore the humidity makes it harder to evaporate. And this is something that it's got a biological component in terms of our historical roots chasing down animals. Number 2, do your aerobic work in the heat. It is better to be active than passive. I mean, saunas are great. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat in Paul's terms. But doing the active work is usually better and more efficient than passive work. But you might consider doing the intensity work inside, because that is a double whammy in the heat. And finally, you need to get uncomfortably hot. You need to continue to lengthen your exposure to get heat adapted. Heat stimulus that's how you adapt to everything. It takes 5 to 14 days to get fully adapted, and it just takes time in the heat. So get out and ride your bike and run. That is all for this week. Thank you for listening, and join us next week for the Athletes Compass podcast. You can help us by asking your training questions in the comments, liking and sharing the podcast, and giving us 5-star reviews, and engaging with us on our social media. For Marjaana Rakai and Dr. Paul Laursen, I am Paul Warloski, and this has been the Athletes Compass podcast. We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Athletes Compass podcast, your North Star through the sometimes complicated world of training for your endurance sport. For a deeper dive into the science of endurance sports, listen to the Training Science podcast and check out the adaptive AI training platform, Athletica AI. And thanks.